Morning. Let's look at the overview for the week last week. Again, one of those weeks where the volumes looked big, but a few big shares responsible, Einstein.
Yes, I think the highlight of the week was the very large block of shares of Safaricom traded. And I think it's an indication there's been a lot of interest in the market with regard to Safaricom, especially since the strong recovery in their half-year results announced last year. So it appears there's quite some level of interest. And as usual, in line with what you've seen before, a lot of foreign investor participation in the market.
Yes, and 58% of market turnover on the day.
Yes, and that therefore indicates that there's quite some level of interest. We've seen since the beginning of the year that the larger buyers have actually been the foreign investors. In view of the fact that we are headed for an election in the within the next 1 month, it seems there's still quite some level of interest and a surge in the market, especially when you compare to what happened in 2007 and 2008.
Now, let's just look at this tax, the 10% excise duty tax on transaction fees charged on money transfer services. Now, there are two concerns about this. The one is the effect on the revenue and growth of a company like Safaricom, also on poorer consumers who have to pay that extra tax. We presume Safaricom will pass this on in its entirety to the consumer.
Yes, Safaricom has already indicated that they will be passing that on, and have issued a statement to that effect. On the one hand, there is a pressure that the government has been facing in terms of its finances, and therefore had to resort to measures to increase this tax or levy this tax, especially because mobile money transfer has been a growing segment. I think the challenge has been the fact that this is a transfer system that is used by the broad cross-section of society, and therefore will have an impact in terms of the charges that they pay in terms of this transfer system. But on the other hand, Safaricom also needs to pass on the cost, because in their view, they need to continuously reinvest in the system and the network to ensure that it is able to support this level of transfer. So on the one hand, while the government needs the money, I think Safaricom also looks at it from an investment perspective, and at the end of the day, the users are the ones who will have to pay much higher fees.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the standard practice in brewing and alcohol issues. Whenever the government excise increases, which it often does, they pass the entire excise increase on immediately to the consumer. Which brings us to East African breweries. They closed the week at 303 shillings, moved up marginally. But what's interesting there, Einstein, is the mix. Diageo, of course, owns East African breweries. Growth of 11% in beer, but premium spirits, Johnny Walker, Smirnoff, those household names, up by 38% and 24%. So a difference changes in the beverage mix in the Kenyan consumer market.
Yes, that is quite correct, and I think it's also a reflection of the growing preferences in terms of the changes in the preferences of tastes among the consumers, of the alcohol consumers in the market. If you've, along with other promotional campaigns that we've seen across the continent, there has been a very active one that East African breweries engaged in recently, targeting the Johnny Walker consumers. And I think that has been the growing wines and spirits segment is actually one of the developments that we've actually seen in East African breweries over the last several years, especially when you look at the issues about the taxes on beer, and therefore have been looking at building that wines and spirits segment, and I think those efforts are now paying. It's also helped that we've been seeing a growing middle class, and that has therefore indicated that there is a change in terms of their tastes and their preferences.
The other area, of course, and I know South African breweries has been concerned with this throughout Africa, is the growth of clear lager as opposed to sorghum beer, more traditional sorghum beer, and the general trend has been upmarket from the sorghum to the clear beer. So while on the one hand the upmarket tastes develop in the spirit market, beer gains, clear beer gains, because the sorghum market is getting smaller.
Yeah, that is quite correct. And I think also one of the other aspects that we've also seen is that the level of, it's also likely that it's also likely to attract some level of higher taxation, I mean, on the sorghum aspect of it. So I think that is also an indication that those changes are taking place in the consumption patterns across the different categories of the beer market.
Now, I talked a moment ago about the shilling being steady last week, but long term it's been weakening, and of course that has an effect on vehicle sales. What's the specific effect there on the market, and are there particular companies that are vulnerable to this?
Yes, and we have we've been having quite a growing vehicle import market. In 2011, we had a very significant impact as a result of the very drastic and the volatile currency movement that we experienced in 2011, and we also seeing the similar trends after a prolonged period of stability. Actually, throughout 2012, we are actually seeing the shilling weakening slightly. There are several factors accountable for this. One being the pre-election concerns, but also the long-term issues of the balance of payments and the current trade account position. And I think the biggest impact has therefore been importation. So companies that are involved in importation, motor vehicles, and also any in the manufacturing that have to do with importing significant capital equipment would also have to be affected. We also expect that energy costs are also likely to be affected, and therefore it bears to be seen how this is going to turn out in the next several months.